In this video, I'm going to talk to you about solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Now, there are three ways of solving a quadratic equation. The other two ways are by factorising or by completing the square. Completing the square and factorising are both useful for certain quadratic equations, but the quadratic formula we're going to talk about in this video will work with any quadratic equation. So a quadratic equation, just to remind you, looks like this. It's a lots of x squared, so that's some lot of x squared, plus or possibly minus b lots of x, and then plus some number. Now when I say plus here, that could be plus a negative, or it could be plus a positive, and this could be plus a negative or plus a positive. And then in order to solve the quadratic, it's got to be equal to 0. Now when we have a quadratic equation like this, with some lot of x squared plus some lot of x plus c equals 0, we can solve this using the quadratic equation. Now remember, this is a quadratic because the highest power of x is squared. If it was less than that, it wouldn't be a quadratic. If it was more than that, it wouldn't be a quadratic. Now, in order to solve this using the quadratic formula, we're going to need the quadratic formula. So here it is. Now don't forget, when we're solving an equation, we're trying to find the unknown. In this case, that's x. So we're trying to find out what the value of x is, and the formula is that x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and then all of that is divided by 2a. Now that looks complicated the first time you see it, but it's fairly simple. It's a case of just plugging some numbers into this formula to get our values of x. Now remember, when you're finding a quadratic, let's have a quick look at this formula. So we've got at the front minus b. Now b over here is whatever's in front of the x, the coefficient of x. So that's minus whatever that coefficient is, plus or minus. Now it's plus or minus because we have two possible solutions to some of our equations. So in some cases a quadratic will give two solutions. Then we have the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. This bit is what we call the discriminant, because this bit decides whether the equation has one solution, that's one value of x, two solutions, or no real solutions. Okay, so that's the discriminant. And the last thing we've got here is the dividing by 2a underneath. Okay, so let's have a go at using this to actually find the solutions to an equation. So let's try the equation x squared minus 4x plus 2 equals 0. Okay, so you can see we've got an x squared, just one of them. We've got negative 4 lots of x. We've got a plus 2, and that is equal to 0, so we can use the formula here to solve the equation. Now the first thing to do is to write down your values of a, b and c. So my value of a is 1 because I've only got 1x squared, so a is 1. My value of b is going to be negative 4, so b is negative 4, and c is positive 2, so c is 2. It's a good idea to write those down so that when you're going through the formula, we can just look over and see what the values are as we substitute them in. Okay, now you also, when you're doing a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula, need to make sure you write down every stage of your working. So we're going to start off by rewriting the formula over here. So we've got it in line with our other working. So minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Now this formula will be given to you on an exam paper, but you do really need to learn it, because if you don't learn it, you might struggle to use it even if it is given to you. Okay, now we're going to substitute our values of a, b and c into the formula. So we've got x equals minus b, and b is negative 4. So minus negative 4 is positive 4. Then we've got plus or minus, leave that in there for now, the square root b squared, so that's minus 4 squared. And we've got it in brackets because we're squaring the minus 4. It's not minus and then 4 squared. It's minus 4 squared. And then take away 4 times 1, because a is 1, times 2, because c is 2. And this square root should continue all the way across there. And then we're dividing the whole thing by 2 times a. So that's 2 times 1. Now be very careful. It's very easy mistakes to either just divide part of this by 2a. It's got to be the whole thing. The other common mistake is to divide by a by mistake. It's always 2 times a. Okay, now we can simplify this a bit. So we've got x equals 4 plus or minus square root of negative 4 squared is 16. And then 4 times 1 times 2 is 8, so that's take away 8. And then 2 times 1 is 2, so that's dividing by 2. Simplify one more step. X equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 take away 8, which is 8. It's the square root of 8 divided by 2. Okay. Now, at this stage, if we were asked to leave it in surd form, we'd need to simplify. But for this one, I'm going to show you how to write it as a decimal answer. So the first thing we need to do is to split this from being a plus and a minus to being 4 plus root 8 and 4 minus root 8. Okay, so I'll write it over here. So we've got x equals 4 plus root 8 all divided by 2. And our other solution is x equals 4 minus root 8 all divided by 2. See over here, it can either be plus or minus. We now take them separately along here. Now, in order to find this value, we now need to put this into our calculator. So if we get our calculator up, okay, we can see we've got 4 plus root 8 divided by 2. We're going to do that in brackets. So we open our bracket first of all. We do 4 plus the square root of 8. Close our brackets, that's our top half of our fraction, and we're dividing the whole thing by 2. And that gives us 3.4142, etc., which if we write it to 2 decimal places will be 3.41. So let's write that on here. That equals 3.41 to 2dp. And if we go back to our calculator for the second one, we've got 4 minus root 8 divided by 2. So again, we're going to open our bracket. We've got 4 take away square root of 8, close the bracket, divide that by 2, equals, and that's 0.58578, etc., which if we round it to 2 decimal places will be 0.59. So let's write that on here. That's going to be 0.59 to 2 decimal places. Let's have a look at another example. This time we're trying to solve x squared plus 8x plus 5 equals 0, but we've been asked to give our answer in surd form. That means that we're not going to give a decimal answer, and so this question could be on a non-calculator exam. Okay, so we've got our general form, ax squared plus bx plus c, and we've got our formula written here. So now the first thing we need to do is find the values of a, b and c from our equation. Okay, so our value of a first of all, the number in front of the x squared is again going to be 1. Our value of b this time is positive, and it's positive 8. And our value of c is also positive, that's positive 5. So we take our formula, so we've got x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Okay, now we've got our values of a, b and c, so we can substitute those in. So minus b is 8, will be minus 8, plus or minus the square root of 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5, because a is 1 and c is 5. And all of that is divided by 2 times 1, because a is 1. Simplify that a bit, we've still got our minus 8 plus or minus. Then we've got square root of 8 squared, which is 64, minus 4 times 1 is minus 4, times 5 is minus 20, and then divided by 2. One more stage of simplifying, so minus 8 plus or minus square root 64 take away 20 is 44, so square root of 44 divided by 2. Now at this stage we've almost finished. If we were going to find a decimal answer, we'd split this up and put it into the calculator, but we want to give our answer in surd form, which means we need to do a little bit more simplifying. Now we're going to have to simplify, if we can, this square root here. Now if you can't remember how to do that, you need to look up how to work with simplifying surds. I'm going to tell you that square root of 44 is the same as the square root of 4 multiplied by the square root of 11. And square root of 4, well, that's a square number, that's 2, so that means that's going to be the same as 2 times root 11. So in our formula here, we've got minus 8 plus or minus 2 times square root of 11, all divided by 2. We're almost finished. Now we need to divide the negative 8 and the 2 root 11 by 2. So we get negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4, plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1, so that's just root 11. So our answer in surd form is negative 4 plus or minus root 11. And if we were going to write it out to finish, we'd say x equals negative 4 plus root 11. Or the other solution would be x equals negative 4 minus root 11. And that's leaving it in surd form as we were asked. Okay, one last example then. Now if you look at this question, solve 3x equals 20 minus x squared, there's something different about this equation, and that is that it isn't in the same form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So before we can solve this, we're going to have to rearrange this equation so that it does match up with this general form. So if you have a close look at this, you can hopefully see that we need to either move the 3x across to the right hand side by subtracting 3x from both sides, or we need to move the 20 minus x squared to the left hand side by subtracting 20 and adding x squared to both sides. Now in general we want to try and keep the x squared positive, so we're going to take away 20 from both sides and add x squared from both sides to both sides, and we'll end up with plus x squared plus the 3x, which was already on the left hand side, take away 20, and then on the right hand side we're just left with 0, and that now does match up with the general form of the quadratic equation, so we can now solve it. So finding our values of a, b and c, a is going to be 1, b is going to be positive 3 and c is negative 20. So we take the formula, x equals minus b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. I hope that's becoming familiar now. So, substituting our values in, we've got minus b, so that's minus 3, plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times minus 20. And then all of that is divided by 2 times 1. Okay, simplify a bit more. Minus 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared, which is 9. Now, this bit you've got to be careful of. We've got negative 4 multiplied by 1 is negative 4, and then multiplied by negative 20. Now, negative 4 multiplied by negative 20 is positive 80. And then 2 times 1 is 2. So that's x equals minus 3 plus or minus the square root of 89 all divided by 2. Which means our two possible solutions are x equals negative 3 plus the square root of 89 all divided by 2, or x equals negative 3 take away the square root of 89 all divided by 2. So those are our two possible solutions. It's either this one or this one. Okay, now we need our calculator. So we take our calculator, we're going to put the first one in, so that's going to be, in brackets, negative 3 plus the square root of 89, close the brackets, all divided by 2, and that equals 3.216. So rounded to 2 decimal places, that's 3.22. To 2 decimal places. And the second one, and remember when you're doing these, you've got to make sure you understand how to use your calculator. So practice with your calculator. It's negative 3, take away square root of 89, close the bracket, and we're dividing by 2, and that gives us negative 6.216, which to 2 decimal places is negative 6.22. So that's negative 6.22 to 2 decimal places. So our values of x are either 3.22 or negative 6.22, both to 2 decimal places.